is Commander Travis, an officer and representative of the Earth Federation. This man is an enemy of the Federation, tried and convicted.
4 years ago, there were many activist groups. The only one that really meant anything was led by Rog Blake.
At first, I thought they wanted to silence me because I was the witness to the murder of 20 people.
Do not attempt to resist arrest.
They butchered my family, my friends.
Every year, more people defy the Federation.
It is true that Blake has command of a superb space vehicle. But he is just a man, backed by a handful of criminals, and that is all.
I must have a crew. No!
Zens will accept your spoken commands.
Destructive animals. 3 months with their computers, I could lift 100 million credits.
I was trading around the near worlds.
Other people's property comes naturally to them.
They said it was murder and he had a gun.
I plan to destroy...
Blake 7. Bringing back some fond memories for me, and we're going to be getting into that. That's right. So welcome to a bit of an unusual streaming time for this session. I don't really do streams before 8 o'clock, but because my guest is located down under, we have a time difference to take into account. So I'm hoping we might pick up a few live viewers as we go, but obviously a lot of people will watch this on replay. So if you do have questions for my guest later, I'm sure I can get them to him. So don't hesitate to type those out in the comments below at a later date, and I'll see what I can do to get them answered. Anyway, so my guest, Mr. ADRIAN Sherlock, has been a writer and a fan of British television shows, probably for longer than me even. And this is a lot of the shows going back in the 1970s, 1980s. We're going to get into those in just a sec. So I'm going to bring you in now. Hello, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Hello. Pleasure to be here.
It's quite funny how we met, both kind of like dropping in on the Space 1999 Shout Studios thing that they show on YouTube. Like they've got it on like 24 hours a day, and I've worked out actually that that's probably quite profitable for them, because
the amazing thing is people keep on going to chat there about the show, no matter how many times they've seen the episodes. It just keeps going and going.
Yeah, and I think the accumulative minutes and watch hours is probably quite big. So so they're probably making a little kind of income on that over time. I think it's for some of the older shows. It's probably a pretty good idea. Right. Well, before we get into the works of Gerry Anderson and others, let me ask you my sort of standard set of questions for every guest that comes onto the channel. I kind of always like to get a sense of how people's journey with film and television culture kind of impacted their own lives as they were growing up, that kind of thing. So there's no right or wrong answer to any of these. Just give me the first thing that comes into your head. What can you remember being the first film that you ever saw on the big screen when you went to the cinema?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's one of two films. I can't remember exactly which order, but when I was a kid, my dad worked at Ford, and they had the Ford Christmas party, and they would get the whole cinema booked out for Ford employees to take their families along. So it was holiday movies, and one of the ones I remember was The Island at the Top of the World, which was a Disney film, sort of a Jules Verne style. Back in the 1800s or something, they have like an airship.
I remember it.
Go to the top of the world, to the ice, and there's like whales with like a horn, like a unicorn, you know.
I remember.
They sort of outrun lava at the end or something, you know.
I remember that film well, and it was one of those movies where the poster promised more than the film really delivered. They didn't quite. They didn't quite have the budget to do it, I think, quite the way that we would like to have seen it done. I mean, that's a film that could benefit from a remake, if I'm honest. Although some people
I think even as a little kid, there was a few bits that stuck out as a little bit corny, you know.
Yeah. I think it probably could benefit from something like that. Do you remember what the last film was you saw on the big screen?
Oh, that would have been the most recent film I saw on the big screen would have been No Time to Die.
Okay, and that was the last James Bond film. How did you feel about the Daniel Craig era of Bond?
Not great, honestly. It started off promising. I think everyone liked Casino Royale.
Yeah,
there was something kind of very pared back and very cool about that black and white opening, where he gets his 00 in the opening of Casino Royale. That and had a Cold War vibe that was very good. But honestly, the way it ended up with, I mean, you just don't kill James Bond. It really felt like someone was sort of giving the middle finger almost to men who saw Bond as a sort of a symbol of, I don't know, the indestructible male hero. You know, it felt really quite negative to me. You know. So,
it was a very. It was a very downbeat ending. We could go down a rabbit hole on that, but I'll rein myself in. Who would you say, when you were growing up, who would you say is the first British actor or actress that you can remember that you kind of started following, that you thought, oh, they're cool, and you know, any time you saw a show with them in, you would watch it? I mean, Donald Sutherland would definitely be one of mine, because when I saw him as Oddball in Kelly's Heroes,
I really
would watch
cried. I cried some serious tears when I heard that Donald Sutherland had passed away. He was a wonderful actor. I had a lot of love for him.
Yeah, same. Big icon from our lives. Another one gone.
When
I have
was
actually got some people watching, so do put a comment in the chat, and if you've got a question for Adrian, just stick it in the chat. Actually got some people watching, so that's nice, because it's an unusual time to stream at this time. People are still at work.
Well, when I was a little boy, I remember the trailer coming on TV for Space 1999 as a new show coming soon. And although Martin Landau was American, it was a British series. And I can remember being a little boy, and I would watch movies like Welcome Home, Johnny Bristol, which had Martin Landau playing a hallucinating Vietnam veteran, which really was not really appropriate for a little boy of about 9 to be watching or something. But I was watching it because I was just like, hey, that's Commander Koenig, you know what I mean? That's he's back on Earth, you know. So he sort of became the first actor that I would watch in anything, no matter how appropriate or inappropriate it may have been, just because he was the bloke off a show that I'd watched, that I just found just had a mesmerizing sort of screen presence, you know. And oddly enough, I saw Martin Landau this week on an episode of The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and he was dressed up in a cape like Dracula, and it was a very funny performance, very reminiscent of what he did many years later in Ed Wood as Bela Lugosi. He was in full sort of, Bela Lugosi, Dracula sort of mode, harassing David McCallum, you know, who's another of my favorite actors. So seeing David McCallum as Ilya Kuryakin and Martin Landau in a Dracula cape saying, "Ha ha, Mr. Kuryakin, welcome." You know, it was very funny and weird experience to see that. Yeah. But the British definitely, probably, to answer your question, maybe it was maybe it was the Goodies, and then probably Doctor Who, you know, Tom Baker, and then and John Pertwee were sort of the first, British actors that I sort of became very fond of and very keen on as a kid.
Yeah, Pertwee was definitely my first Doctor. I just, when I started watching Doctor Who, it was just at the end of his run. So then it was Baker, who was radically different. So I always kind of had a soft spot for Pertwee. Pertwee had something very fatherly about him. Kind of reminded me of my dad. So what about the next question was American actor or actress, and you kind of answered that because you said Martin Landau So,
Yeah.
so we kind of had that advance in advance. Tell me a favorite film, can be British, American, can be from Hong Kong, wherever. A favorite movie of yours that you have to watch at least once a year.
Oh, maybe 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay, no, that's a good answer. Do you have a movie that you like to watch occasionally when you're chilling out with some peers that some might consider, or you might consider, a guilty pleasure?
The Omega Man.
That's a good choice. Favorite television drama series since the year 2000?
Oh, piece of cake to answer that one. Breaking Bad.
Ah, okay. And favorite television drama series when you were growing up?
Oh, straight drama,
That's it.
not science fiction.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's do sci-fi first.
Well, when I was growing up, I got very hooked on Doctor Who, though I did have periods of time where Blake Seven and then reruns of the Twilight Zone, the original Twilight Zone, both sort of turned my head away from Doctor Who while they were on, because they were so good in terms of quality. And then post my love of Doctor Who, in 1985, I got to see UFO, the precursor to Space 1999, and I thought UFO was so good. I really, for many years, it was probably my favorite show. I was a bit obsessed with it, honestly. I actually had to step away from it for a while because I actually started to feel that I was so obsessed with it that it probably wasn't, good for me. Also, yes, I love the Tomorrow People. Hugely fond of the Tomorrow People, and every so often a show comes along and you kind of get blown away by it. And another one which hadn't been shown here, but which I finally got to see in the early 2000s when I got the DVD set, was Sapphire and Steel, and that was another one which blew me away. Yeah, with how good it was. So. Yeah, I've got a bit of a list of favorite shows. Yeah.
So, for the benefit of Fandad Menace, a fellow YouTuber, by the way, and mate, if you've got any questions for Adrian, just chuck them in, and I'll make sure I put them to him. This Tomorrow People guide is one of the many television guides that Adrian has written, kind of like a breakdown of the show, episode by episode, some stuff about how it all came to be and who were the key creatives behind it and stuff like that. Yeah, Sapphire and Steel is often a show that gets overlooked by people, as he's saying he forgot about it. Okay, there's that's the Sapphire and Steel.
That's the hardcover of the with the first cover that was on it, drawn by a friend of mine who's an illustrator called Chris Pace, and the current version has a much more colourful cover designed by Kevin Langille, who did the cover for the Tomorrow People one you've got there. So Kevin's also a very brilliant artist, and he creates some really cool covers for me. That's the latest one Kevin's actually created, you're showing right there, which is the UFO one there. I did sort of an epic 3-volume guide to UFO, and that one you're showing there is actually a collection where I've put the 3 volumes together in one big book.
Why was the guide to UFO particularly bigger than the rest? Because it did, if I'm right, I think it did 1 season. Was it 32 episodes?
26.
26. I've got the either the Blu-ray or the DVD box set. I forget which it is in the other room. Right, so 26 episodes, 1 season. I know they were going to do a second season, which eventually morphed it over time into Space 1999 for various reasons. But why was this such a detailed book? Why was it originally 3 books? And how did what's the thinking there?
Well, I think I really saw UFO as a show which had a sort of a unified story arc running through it. And I really saw it as having very much a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And I wanted to draw attention to that. And I think the size of it, the reason it's like about 350 pages or something all up, is because I had been so obsessed with it for so long when I was a younger man, and it had such a big influence on my life. And I actually corresponded with Ed Bishop, and I actually had a chance to even do a small interview with Sylvia Anderson at one point. So I'd had such a lot of involvement as a major fan, and had even worked on a project to try and do a sort of an unofficial revival, where I actually wrote a script and sent it to Ed Bishop and got his feedback on it and got his ideas. So it had been such a big deal in my life. I felt I kind of owed it to Ed Bishop and the memory of Ed Bishop, and I owed it to the show to sort of try and give back something a bit special, a bit more epic than just a straightforward episode guide and reviews. I wanted to go as in depth as possible. I kind of had this ambition, I guess, to make it sort of I guess maybe well, I suppose it's really open to the reader to say whether you've succeeded, isn't it? But my ambition going in was to try and write, the biggest, most in-depth book on UFO that there had ever been. I wanted to write something special. I always felt that the show deserved more recognition than it got, and so it was my way of kind of pushing for it to have a bit more.
I agree. Hey, look, we've got 7 people watching, so there you go. There's people out, even though we're on a bad time slot. People are still attracted to this topic. Nice. I remember because you would have been in Australia when you were a kid, right? You didn't grow up in London. Yeah. I know you've moved about a bit, but so when I grew up, the only time we got to see this was, I seem to recall it had quite a late night time slot, and I wasn't allowed to watch it. And it would be one of those many shows that would kind of lure me downstairs, sort of creeping downstairs as a kid, trying not to like creep, and then looking through that, looking through that crack in the door and watching the show. And I'm sure my parents knew I was there, and I could always tell it was UFO because I could hear that woo woo sort of noise of the
eerie sound of the saucer. Hey,
we've got Andy in the chat. Good to see Andy.
I can actually remember as at the premiere of Space 1999, when that astronaut on the moon, his eye turned opaque, and we saw it in black and white, which looked really creepy in black and white. And my mother sent me to bed. She said, "This show's too scary. You'll have nightmares, Adrian. You're going to bed. Off you go." And I was like, no, I really want to watch it. No, it's too scary. Off you go. And I did the same thing. I'm sure I snuck out of bed and crept down the corridor and tried to crane my ear to the doorway or peek through the gap in the door, just try to get a glimpse of, because I'm sure my parents left it on and watched the rest of the episode, and I didn't get to see it. So,
yes, in the UK, when Space 1999 dropped the first season, if I remember rightly, it was originally scheduled like early evening, but it was still sort of very much sold as a show for adults. So it was showed at like sort of 7 o'clock on a Saturday or something like that. But when they re-showed it, it got the Thunderbird slot. It went to midday on a Saturday. So it was like after that, we had like Saturday morning show with Sally James and Chris Tarrant, and then it got put at the end of that. And I think you had that, and you had that on one side and bloody Black Beauty on the other. And the BBC always put Black Beauty opposite the Gerry Anderson show, whatever it was. And me and my then sister would end up screaming at each other over who got to watch which program, until my parents wisely bought a second black and white television to dissolve such things. Dolores Mantes, who's in this shot, I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe she's one of the few casts that's still alive, if I remember rightly.
I thought I heard that she actually passed away a few years ago.
Oh, did she? Maybe she did. Let's have a quick look.
I believe the
you're
other
right.
two moon-based ladies are still
you're right.
Gabriel Drake's still alive, and so is Antonia Ellis, who played Joan. Yeah.
Damn, I always really wanted to meet Dolores. She was definitely one of my first confused child moments. I would have loved to have told her that.
Very pretty, very pretty girl. Yes, very.
Now
lady,
you'd know if this story is either attributed to her or Elizabeth Adair from the Tomorrow People, because I know I read this somewhere. I think it's Dolores, but the story goes that she was in a pub in Hammersmith, and I can't remember why she was there, but she was on her own. And this was, of course, in the 1970s when there was a lot of strikes and power cuts, and these power cuts would last for quite a few hours, sometimes days. And we had a power cut, and she met the person who became her husband in that pub, in that power cut. They met in the dark and ended up keeping each other company.
Right, yeah. I think that is Dolores Menzies. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. She met it. Yeah, that's right. She gave up acting after that and got married and had children. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that meet a rich man in the pub in the dark. It's but I thought that was quite a sweet story. She's still alive, I believe, this lady.
Yes. Her Gabriel Drake is the sister of Nick Drake, the drummer and musician. Yeah. Nick Drake was a musician who died young, and many years after his passing, his music sort of developed a cult following. Yeah. So.
It was a great show. It kind of got messed around on the networks a little bit, and I think also the narrative of the show. There were a few characters that kind of came and went. That was a bit. That they didn't quite know what to do with them, that only appeared in a few episodes, but they felt like they were main characters, but then they kind of disappeared.
A few things happened behind the scenes where there were actors who, for various reasons, withdrew from the show after a short time. And I think they sort of finally got some stability with the character of Paul Foster coming in as a sort of second fiddle character who... if you look at some of the scripts that were written, you watch the finished episode and it's Paul Foster, but the actual script was written often for characters like Captain Carlin or someone else who only was in a few episodes. So sometimes they would hastily, cross out the name, or not even cross out the name, just give him the script and say, his lines and his stage directions, that's Paul Foster this week, and he'd go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he was sort of hastily given some scripts that had been written for other characters, and with a few tweaks, obviously. Television was very much like that, in those days. There's one of the later scripts, Colonel Virginia Lake, played by Wanda Ventham, isn't in it. When you read the script, it just says Computer Man. The computer man prints out some information and reads it out and tells Straker what's going on. And in the episode, those lines were given to Colonel Lake to give us something to do, that week.
Look at that. There's Arthur Daly. George Cole.
Indeed. And he's surprisingly good in that episode. He
is good. I mean, he was always so talented. Paul Foster, who's on the right here, the character of Paul Foster. Now, some people will remember him from almost the opening scene, not quite the opening scene, but almost the opening scene of The Spy Who Loved Me. And he is the lover of Barbara Bach's character, Agent XXX, and it's kind of a nice. It's kind of a nice setup because it's sort of that scene is set up like he's going to be the Russian agent. And then it's actually the woman that takes the call. And my understanding is the reason that he got that part was because he came in and tested for Bond and they liked him.
Right. But they tested him 5 times, I think. He more screen tests than any other actor. In fact, the director of Live and Let Die apparently said if Roger Moore can't get out of his whatever his contract was, the Protectors or something. He said, or Persuaders or something. He said, you'd be perfect. You'd be really great. Guy Hamilton liked him, the Eon people really liked him, but sadly it never was to be.
Andy Jones is pointing out that me and him went to see The Spy Who Loved Me at the Prince Charles Cinemas, a cinema that shows older films, and there was quite a cheer for the film from the audience. It was awesome. It was packed out. It was great seeing an older film.
When I was, you remember when For Your Eyes Only came out, which was early 80s? Yeah. In Australia, they were showing it at the cinema, and they were doing a double feature. So at the drive-in. So they showed The Spy Who Loved Me, which I had been too young to go and see at the time. So I sort of badgered my dear old mother. I said, "Can you take me to the drive-in to see James Bond?" And we went and saw double feature, Spy Who Loved Me and For Your Eyes Only, and the Spy Who Loved Me was so bloody great. I mean, it really was amazing. And of course, I'm sitting next to my mum and I'm looking at Barbara Bach, and I had to sort of bite my tongue because I was I don't know what I was, about 12 or 13 at the time. I felt like saying something about, my God, she's pretty, but I thought I'd better shut up because it's my mum next to me, So that was a bit embarrassing.
It's funny as well because seeing those two films together, one that came in between them was Moonraker, and if you'd never seen The Spy Who Loved Me as a kid, and you went to see a double bill of that and For Your Eyes Only, For Your Eyes Only would be a massive anticlimax after watching.
It was,
massive battle scenes with guys in jumpsuits, and For Your Eyes Only is very grounded and much more like sort of probably how James Bond was actually written, and not quite so global. And I was hoping there were going to be guys in jumpsuits hiding in the monastery, and a big battle with people jumping off helicopters and things, but it wasn't to be. Sadly.
It was probably a bit too down to earth after the height of The Spy Who Loved Me.
I think it's a good Bond film, but it just doesn't. It feels like it needs a much bigger ending than we got. Unfortunately, but So let's go back to your writing career. So obviously you're a big fan of these various sci-fi shows as a kid, and that sort of bled over into adulthood, and you went and tracked down the ones that you'd missed. When did you first start to? That's a great shot.
Where she's trying her lipstick,
I know. When did you first start to write the guidebooks, and which was the first one that you did? Was it the UFO? Is that how it started? Was it UFO?
No, it was actually I actually started off with this one right here, Space 1999 Year One. Actually, to be honest, I'd actually written, before I wrote that, I had written what they call a short read, which was meant to be just like an ebook for the things you can read in under half an hour or something on Amazon, and that was just kind of testing the water, So because I'd tried my hand at various things. I made a TV series for community television using scripts for indie films I couldn't get off the ground in the 90s, and I'd written some stage plays and produced and directed my own plays and things at the local theatre. And I'd tried a bit of fiction writing as well. This is actually Damon Dark and the Biodome, which is a Quatermass X-Files type thing set in Australia about a character who I played on TV and on community TV and on the web, and which was on YouTube, and which was part of the, inspired in a way by UFO. So I'd done a lot of attempts at writing fiction. I'd even gotten I eventually at one point wrote for the Lethbridge Stewart series. That's with Andy Frank.
Oh yeah, like the sort of fan fiction spin-off. Stuff.
Yeah. So he got the copyright from Hannah Haseman, whose father co-created, wrote the Web of Fear and had the sort of therefore the rights to Lethbridge Stewart as a character, as he introduced in the Web of Fear. So he started this series, and this was my contribution to the series. The Brigadier and units, or the precursors to unit, come to Australia with Dr. Anne Travers as scientific advisor, and they discover aliens under the opal mining town of Coober Pedy in Australia. But somewhere along the way, I thought, well, I'll just try a little short read about Quatermass called The Quatermass Experiment and Its Legacy. And that sold, to my amazement, a few copies, but people wrote, oh, it's too short, or, well, it is a short read, but I thought, well, okay, I'll expand it. So I expanded it, and I did different editions, and the final edition ended up being over 30,000 words, and now it's a proper book with a big cover and everything. And so that was kind of the first, but the first time I ever actually sat down to really just from scratch write a whole book about a show, it was Space 1999 Volume 1. And then I did Volume 2 because Volume 1 went down pretty well. And then I'd been teaching English as a second language for 21 years to sort of, because acting and filmmaking wasn't really paying the bills, so I became a teacher. So the company that I was teaching for sort of had some changes a couple of years ago, and suddenly I had a lot of time and not much money. So I thought, well, my books on Space 1999 and my short read, which grew into an actual big book about Quatermass, have continued to sell for the last few years. I thought, well, I wasn't getting very far with, fiction or plays or filmmaking. So, maybe I'll write some more guidebooks. So I wrote one on Sapphire and Steel, and that went all right. And then I thought, maybe I'll do UFO. And then after I started on UFO, I thought, well, what else? Oh, I know what I want to write about. Blake 7, So I ended up doing 4 volumes on Blake 7, one for each season, and a sort of as I say, a 3-volume breakdown of UFO. And I've recently done a combined edition. I think you just put the cover up there, of both seasons of Space 1999 as a 2-in-1 as well, called the Complete series.
Yeah, no one's going to want to buy a guidebook to Space 99 Season 2 on its own. You might as well just say,
just jump that one.
The Bringers of Wonder are good. Don't watch anything else.
Exactly. Just get Destination Moonbase Alpha, because they cut the stupid joke off the end. They always, Freiberg always ended every damn episode with a joke. So if you watch Destination Moonbase Alpha, the editors cut the joke off the end, and they added a 5-minute recap of Breakaway from season 1, which was really good. So Destination Moonbase Alpha is Bringers of One. Removing the joke at the end. So but back in the VHS days, when you couldn't get any Space 1999, you'd borrow Destination Moonbase Alpha from the video store and watch it till the bloody tape ran out, wore out.
But basically, back in the day, there was when video first became a thing. For those people who are Jerry Anderson fans, like myself, and I've got various Anderson vehicles here, there was no, there was not really any Jerry Anderson stuff on video. And then I think it was ITC bought the rights and to the home video market. And I don't know the full story of who got together and sat down and said, "Hey, why don't we do this?" But they created 2 Thunderbird feature films, one called Thunderbirds in Outer Space, the other one called Thunderbirds Countdown to Disaster, which were 2 episodes wedged together. and they committed the sin of all sins where Thunderbirds is concerned, which is that they fucked with the opening titles, which is one of the strongest things of the show. That they messed with the countdown. They didn't have the kind of this episode intro, which is absolutely vital. They should have just done one, kept the format the same, but just edited it so that it was the whole thing.
I remember borrowing Thunderbirds in Outer Space on VHS from my video store back in the 80s. Again, when there was nothing.
Those opening titles for that were horrifying. They were awful.
They were that terrible sort of low-res 80s animation. They would do these. The words would have a sort of glow around them. Yeah.
Oh, and I mean it was and just kind of like slides of ships going past or something. Ronan, who's commenting, thanks for popping in, buddy. Season 2 lost the funky theme. He's talking about Space 1999.
Yeah.
I'm gonna show a clip of Space 1999. In fact, you know what? Why don't we do that now? I'm sure I'm going to get flagged for copyright, but I'll because as we're talking about intros, this is a good time to show this, and I may have to trim it out later. So if you're watching this later and we suddenly go, that's why we had to trim this thing out. Now that intro to that show tells you everything you need to know about that show in a nutshell. You can be watching episode 1 or you can be watching episode 20, and you know what it's about. You've kind of got a hint of the story to come for this episode, and you've got a summary of kind of, what the show's about, which is the moon being ripped out of Earth's orbit. It's a classic older show, which does include, I should warn people, very large flared trousers, but don't hold that against it. I mean, that also had its opening cut to ribbons. The other funny thing about the Space 1999 VHS movie was that they reinserted a load of scenes that were cut. You must know about that, of course. All the stuff back on Earth. Cuts to the stuff back on Earth where they're talking about how can they rescue the people up in Alpha, and there's some of those scenes are extended. They're not the same as the ones in the original episode, and I think they dumped them from the original broadcast, a lot of it. But it's
I think what happened there. There is actually, or there was on YouTube, some video where they just kind of had, I guess, pictures and text, but they had the actual audio from the original audio tapes of missing scenes from the pilot. So that was interesting. But I don't think there's actually any extant film, except maybe a few things which might be on some dubs Martin Landau personally had in his collection. But one of the missing sequences from Breakaway was that on the way to the moon at the beginning, in the opening scene, there was a kind of a news report which Martin Landau's character hears about the Metaprobe, very much kind of like in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where there's a news broadcast about the space mission to Jupiter.
Right.
Sort of a Metaprobe news coverage piece, which at the start, and there was some subplot about Commander Gorski of Moonbase was trying to sort of pressure Dr. Helena Russell into his bed, and she was rejecting him, and so he was sort of giving her a hard time and not letting her report her findings and discrediting her about her investigation into what was happening with the astronauts. So there was a lot of stuff for the very good actor who played Commander Gorski, which ended up on the cutting room floor. Because he's quite a big actor, and he got on the cutting room floor.
He's a great actor, and I always remember him from Dalek Invasion of Earth, which was directed by my best friend's dad, and he played that.
Jason Flemyng's dad.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Do you know Jason Flemyng?
Yeah, he's my older brother in all but name. He co-owns copyright to all my books and scripts.
Oh,
So
he
well,
played
they will
Quatermass.
that's right, he did. They will all of that stuff will all pass to his children when I'm no longer here.
I thought he was very good as Quatermass, actually. Yeah, a
He
lot of
really
people didn't like
enjoyed.
that
He really
live
enjoyed.
version.
He really enjoyed doing Quatermass. Leah Brody, who pops up in Space 1999, who of course you'll remember was in Warlords of Atlantis, and a Roger Moore favourite of mine, North Sea Hijack, known as goes by the name of Folks in America. She did this episode of Space 1999. She's another one who met somebody, got married, disappeared from acting completely, which is a shame because I always thought she was very good. And this is Gareth Thomas's very brief appearance in Space 1999 as a pilot.
Gareth Hunt from the New Avengers.
Gareth Hunt, sorry. Yeah. My parents met Gareth Hunt at a dinner party not long after this episode was shot, actually. Because he was doing all those Maxwell coffee ads.
Do you know about why he was not in it more? Because I gather he wasn't invited back after the first day of shooting. So did he sort of say what happened there?
I'm told that he was quite difficult to work with from quite a few people, actually.
I see.
Yeah, I don't know what happened on Space 1999, but I know he could be quite difficult. But I know at the dinner party, he kind of ended up holding court with his various stories instead of the host, and I think the host was quite upset. And I just remember my parents talking about it when they came back. It was a bit of a story that did the rounds at our house, you know.
Right, he sounds like a bit of a character, yeah.
Do you have a favourite episode from season 1 of Space 1999? If you had to pick one, I'm curious to know if it might be the same as my own.
Season 1's an embarrassment of riches, really, isn't it? There's so many good episodes. It's hard to pick just one. Breakaway itself, I think, is wonderful, full of iconic images. And then there's Voyager's Return. I absolutely adore. It's sort of that sort of tale of redemption and guilt has sort of always been quite haunting to me.
That's the one with isn't that the one with Jeremy Kempin as the guest? Yeah, guest actor. Yeah.
And I think War Games is possibly my favorite episode of all time. It's just such an epic and very philosophical as well, you know.
That's the one. That's the one with the actor who played the alien. Michael Culliver, I think. We lost him recently.
Anthony Valentine.
Was it Anthony Valentine? Oh, I think Anthony Valentine's still around. I think. But that's the one where he's got the line, "You cannot settle here, Alphons." He sort of talks like that. You know,
sort of staccato.
Yeah, and that was the one that was packaged with Breakaway as Destination Moonbase South. Those were the 2 episodes that were put together as a movie, if I remember rightly.
That was the alien attack film. Yeah.
This is an absolutely diabolical episode of the worst magnitude. And this guy looks like Jason King. He's supposed to be God. I mean, Jason King may well have argued.
That was that actor who you said looked like Jason King. He was actually in a horror film from William Castle called Sardonicus. You remember William Castle famously, the big project he finally got off the ground was The Exorcist, though I think he had to sort of hand it over to more A-list type people.
Right.
So the funny thing is that the writer of that episode was Terence Feely, who's actually a really great writer and wrote the Time Freeze episode of UFO, which is very famous. And wrote The Girl Who Was Death for The Prisoner, and wrote for The Avengers, and of course he wrote Bringers of Wonder. He was actually a really great writer. But that episode where the guy's meant to be God, it doesn't quite work.
No.
The idea is good, but it but it kind of feels like he's been asked to write basically a plot for Star Trek that doesn't fit into Space 1999.
Yeah, it does. It feels very much like a Star Trek script, which is probably why Fred No Talent Burger, agreed to its. I won't pull any punches on my opinion of him. Caroline Mortimer's in the episode "The Last Enemy" in season 1. And sometimes when the show was broadcast in the UK, that was the last episode that was shown, as opposed to Testament of Arcadia. I think she's my favorite villainess in Space 1999, and in some ways I feel like her character almost inspired Servalan. She could be a younger Servalan in command of a battleship in her earlier days.
That's a good point. Yeah. I always loved that episode. I have very fond memories as a kid of it being on Saturday night, and the Eagles not taking off because they're being interfered with from her ship, and then the ship landing, and then, the door opens and it's this sort of leather-clad Susie Quattro type 70s babe comes in, and everyone raises their eyebrows. It was a really cool episode with and loaded with special effects. I mean, even the missiles had better build and better design as models than model spaceships in other shows, and that was just the missiles they were firing,
I mean, the two gunships in it are massively impressive. One of them was kind of a rip-off of Space 2001, one of the ships in 2001, but incredible model work, much of which was our man who did all the stuff he did most of the model work for Jerry Anderson and indeed the Bond films. God, name's just gone out of my head. You know who I'm talking about.
Well, Brian Johnson was head of special effects on Space 1999, and Derek Meddings was the man he worked with.
Derek Meddings was often the guy who kind of would build and design the models, and then later would kind of Brian Johnson would blow them up, I think. If I remember rightly, it was put to me a bit like that.
I got a really, you always want to meet your heroes. I actually got told off by one of my heroes. I got told off quite soundly by Nick Alder from Space 1999 because I mentioned that I'd read an interview with Martin Bauer, who said that he'd done some work on something, and I think he was referring to Martin Bauer would do the dirtying down and the detailing, on models, and I think Nick Alder misunderstood me and thought that I was saying that Martin Bauer had blown up the spaceships, and Nick Alder told me in no uncertain terms, don't go around saying that's bullshit, and he told me very bluntly, he said, I blew things up because, Martin Bauer wouldn't have anything to do with pyrotechnic effects. He stayed right away from explosives and fire and things like that, So, Nick Alder gave me a right telling off over the internet, which sort of broke my heart a little bit because he was one of my heroes, of course. The special effects on Jerry's shows were always heroes to me as a boy. So I was a little bit broken-hearted, but Nick Alder made it very, very blunt to me that when it came to pyrotechnics and blowing things up, he was the guy, and definitely not, Martin Bauer, who would not have anything to do with explosives,
Martin actually makes a pretty decent living by building custom, hand-built Jerry Anderson models to order for people. And,
I had impression.
I had a conversation with him one time about building me a Sidewinder because I was trying to build it and it wasn't happening. And I saw a picture of one he'd built that was about 2-3 feet long. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'd quite like that. Can you give me a quote? How much would that cost? And I think it was close to $2,000. And I was like, Well, yeah, I might not be able to get that right now, but if I win the lottery, I'll be in touch. And if I win the lottery, I probably would be in touch. Do you know the story behind the naming of this episode, The Rules of Luton?
Yeah, I gather Luton is a place in England, and he pretty much drove past the sign for Luton Airport, Fred Freiberger, and silly bugger thought Americans have never heard of it, and he read it out as Luton, you know. So he said, we'll have the planet Luton, and thinking that the show was going to be sold to America, and that was all that mattered. He didn't think anybody in England would ever watch it, you know. So I don't think he cared, you know.
It's Luton Airport is apart from the fact that it also appeared in a song around that time, it is, you know, not considered the most salubrious place in the UK. Shall we'll just put it like that. And I remember when this episode came out, it's actually one of the better episodes of season 2. I thought, where all the plants dominate the planet and living creatures are kind of.
I always enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought it was one of the better ones, but
it's directed by Val Guest, who directed the first 2 Hammer horror Quatermass movies, and of course the guest stars are Roy Marsden, who went on to be Inspector Dalgleish and starred in the Sandbaggers espionage series, and David Jackson, who played Gan on Blake 7. So you've kind of got great actors and a great director. So even though the script by Fred Freiberger was a bit nutty and a bit basic, I think they made a fist of it. You know, they really tried their best to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, sort of thing. You know.
Yeah. So you've done Space 1999. I guess one of the UFO various Jerry Anderson shows. But we should talk about some of the non-Anderson stuff. As much as we could talk about Anderson shows all night. So in one of the shows that you've covered, which was immensely popular in my childhood, and everyone from my generation's got a famous kind of where they were when everyone on Blake 7 died story. You know, it's Blake 7, and it's interesting. These are the videos that were released over time, and I remember these custom covers that came out, and I always thought these custom covers were great. The new artwork, it kind of like made them look very spectacular and cool. These covers were terrible, and I remember that, you know, when they came out, people were always buying these religiously. It was a bit like when Star Trek came out, 2 episodes per tape. You know, it took ages for people to buy them all. Blake 7 is a show that, like the Tomorrow People, I think it's probably fair to say it's not aged well, because the visual effects were very average to mediocre. Occasionally there was something nice, but costumes and makeup were, you know, really like what's available. And sometimes you'd have happy accidents, like the Federation sort of stormtroopers actually looked really good. Their costume was very simple, but these kind of all black guys with gas masks on was very effective. But I have rewatched it not that long ago, and there's a lot of stuff in it now that doesn't really work. But what does work, and you may agree or disagree with my views, but for me, what really works about this show is the story and the world, and the fact that you're actually, for all intents and purposes, you're following a bunch of people that are rebels, but really they're also criminals. And Blake is actually kind of quite a misguided hero, ultimately. I think that if they could remake this with a proper budget, I think it could be really good. Some people would think that's sacrilege, but what's your view on that?
Well, you know, it's interesting, because in the if you look at the story of Doctor Who, it started off in black and white, and it was very much, you know, the early days of the BBC, where you could get away with a lot. And Terry Nation was very heavily involved. And he described Blake 7 as, you know, I wanted another go. I wanted a second sort of crack at it. I'd done science fiction with Doctor Who, but I wanted another shot at it. And you can almost get the feeling that Blake 7 is kind of his refinement of all the things that worked and junking all the things that didn't work so much on Doctor Who in the early days. And one of the things was that when you come up to the 1970s, once the Hinchcliffe era was over, you know, if you look at the last few seasons of Tom Baker and then what happened in the 80s, there was a lot of complaints, even from Doctor Who fans, that the monsters on colour TV were starting to look really cheesy and embarrassing. So he's kind of come up with an alternative to Doctor Who where, you know, the Doctor stole the TARDIS and went on the run, but who from? You know, there was no sort of pursuit. Whereas on Blake 7, you've got this curly-haired Blake who's a sort of an alternative to the Doctor. As you say, he gets much darker and quite misguided in the second season. And they're sort of fugitives. They steal this alien ship, kind of like, instead of disguised as a police box, it's an actual spaceship, but it's alien, like the TARDIS, but in a different way, and take off in it. And this time they're not being pursued by monsters or robots. They're being pursued by corrupt humans, you know. So it's kind of like an alternative in a way to classic Doctor Who, but without the cheesy monsters and without the police box, and with a much grittier, more grown-up edge to it, and perhaps more sophisticated characterization. So yeah, I mean, I agree. If you look at it directly now, how it looks, you would say, well, that doesn't stand up very well. But if you were comparing it to Doctor Who at the same time that it was being made, in some ways it stands up better because, you know, it avoids a lot of the pitfalls that Doctor Who was falling into by that point.
I think the strengths, particularly seasons 1 and 2 of Blake 7, are the scripts, and for the most part, there's a couple of naff ones, but for the most part, they're pretty strong, and the whole storyline around Star One, and that it being, you know, the center of power of the Federation, and then you have the thing with the I can't remember if it's also Star One or if it's a separate location, but you have that place that's like the barrier, the fortress that's keeping out an alien race. And aliens have penetrated that space station, and they've replicated humans, and that's all a great storyline. All of that, it's really great.
Yeah, if you look at the first season, Terry Nation sort of sets up Blake as almost like Robin Hood in outer space. You know, it's quite idealistic. But then in the second season, Chris Boucher sort of darkens Blake and starts to make him look quite misguided. He gets Gam killed the first time he tries to get the computer center. And then when he finds it on Star One, he's about to blow it up, and he realizes that, hang on, as you say, there's a barrier and there's aliens, and if he destroys Star One, then the whole human race will get wiped out by these aliens. So you've suddenly got the moral dilemma, and you know, and then it's sort of left a bit up in the air until Avon learns that the Federation kind of did get its backside handed to it by the aliens. But at the same time, you know, the cost has been horrendous, and now Blake is missing. So you kind of get a second bite of the cherry with the sort of the Avon era, I guess you could say, where you get a sort of a different take on the show. And I know some people have said the third season, the show starts to look directionless without Blake and that great story arc they had. But there is also this payoff, which is that all of the minor characters, the supporting characters, which the audience really liked, but which were sort of subservient to Blake and his battle with the Federation, all of those sort of minor characters now get to have an episode in the spotlight. You know, there's a few Avon episodes, and there's a Villa episode, and there's a Callie episode, and you know, so it gets to be more of an ensemble piece, and we get to sort of explore those characters in a way that perhaps we hadn't in the first two seasons. So yeah, it's characterization and its innovative approach, I guess, are what stand up, even though maybe if you're just looking purely at, particularly the opening titles, look really cheesy. I mean, they look cheesy when they were brand new, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, do you think on that basis, is it something that, because there were several attempts to revive it. My late friend Alan Marks, who was visual effects supervisor on Space Precinct, Jerry Anderson's Space Precinct, and I got to visit the sets of that when it was being filmed down in Shepperton. I got to visit the miniatures unit, which was absolutely incredible experience.
With Stephen Begg, yeah?
Yeah, Steve Begg, that's right. In fact, Steve Begg has agreed to come on the channel to do an interview, but I just don't know when yet. He's always working, but he has agreed to come on. I've been pestering him for ever since I started the channel. I've been pestering him to come on. Right. But yeah, it would be. But Alan certainly was very much had his finger on the pulse of the stories going around. There was a particular individual, I can't remember who, what his name was, in the sort of early 2000s. He was constantly trying to get Blake 7 remade, a relaunch. There was a picture of the new design of the Liberator that was going around. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And I just kept saying to Alan, well, why is it not happening? And Alan said to me, well, it's quite simple, Lance. This guy's an absolute wanker, and no one wants to work with him because he keeps trying to get everybody to work for nothing to produce a pilot. And with the promise of giving everybody jobs on the show. But it's just that I don't know the name of this individual, but I got told this story in some detail more than once, because this went on for quite a few years, that they were trying to do this. I don't think that individual got right.
Yeah, I remember hearing about various revival attempts and various stories about the fact that it was going to be revived. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was it was strange that it didn't happen, because there was a time when it had a really big following, a huge following, and I know Paul Darrow was keen to do it. So there was a time where I really thought it could have happened, and I remember thinking also, it wasn't a show that depended heavily on visual effects. It was a show that depended on its characters. So you didn't need a lot to bring it back, I wouldn't have thought.
I think
but maybe it was just a lack of good people behind it. Yeah.
Well, this guy had the rights for a certain period of time. I know he lost them. He doesn't have them now. And I mean, I trust Alan Marks's judgment in people implicitly. And if he tells me someone's a bad egg, then I take that as gospel. And I think that part of the reason that it didn't happen is because of this individual. People didn't want this individual to be the person who was relaunching Blake 7.
That's such a pity, isn't it?
It is, because obviously many of the cast have passed away now. I met Jacqueline Pierce. She took me out for a drink for my birthday, which was very kind of her. I had a wonderful evening with her in the early 2000s when she was doing a play called Dangerous Corner by J.B. Priestley in the West End, and I dropped her a letter back. What was your
impression of her?
Oh, absolutely lovely woman. She was there with her. I don't want to make assumptions, but I believe there were four of us. There was her and I believe her partner, this other lady, and myself and my friend who'd been to see the play. And I hadn't met her before, but I had been in touch with her. I'd invited her to come and see shows of mine that I was directing because I wanted to work with her. I always thought very highly of her as an actress. I thought she had amazing presence. I loved the way she delivered dialogue. And in many ways, it's a shame that she, I guess that was her iconic role. But she some people get very fed up with people sort of, oh yeah, you're in Blake 7, and that's the only thing they remember. But she wore that badge really well. She was quite happy to, listen to fans' praise and all the rest of it. But I guess anyway, I dropped this letter backstage, and I said, "We're coming to see the show. I would love to meet you afterwards. You know, and it's my birthday. Blah blah blah. Please let me take you out for a drink." And her response was, "No, no, no. If it's your birthday, I'll be taking you out for a drink." So she was very kind. I also met the actress who played Dana in season 3.
Yes.
She literally lives about 900 yards that way from me, and we kept bumping into each other in Crouch End. And she came to see my feature film when it screened in Crouch End. Josette Simon, we're talking about.
Yes.
Very lovely woman, exceptionally talented actress. Someone else I would love to work with had the occasion occurred. And I remember when we only had one conversation about Blake Seven, and the conversation was this, which I think is good for you to hear, which was, I said, "So, you know, are you bored of talking about Blake Seven?" He says, cautiously skirting around the topic of to whether to ask her to regale me with Blake Seven stories. And her response, very polite response as we were having coffee together, was, "Well, Blake Seven was one of my first big jobs, and when people ask me about it, it's a bit like going back to school and talking about when I was at school. And I don't really like talking about when I was at school. Is that fair enough?" And I was like, "Yeah." So anyway, this script that I'm interested in you doing, we sort of, that was it. So I didn't really talk to her about Blake Seven, even though I wasn't a big fan of season 3. But I did like her character. I thought her character was an excellent character. Like the whole storyline with her father, and so
yeah, her father, of course, was the voice of Lieutenant Green in Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons.
God, that's right. Yeah, I remember reading that somewhere else.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody was to try and reboot this, do you think that's something you would want to see?
Oh, well, yeah, look, I mean, I think what I probably would like to see, that, you know, there's a original novel out called Vindictus, which is about another ship like the Liberator, and it's named Vindictus, which means sort of victory, or instead of liberation, you know, like the Liberator, and it's set a few years down the track after the events of Blake Seven, with sort of people who in some of them are like maybe the children or descendants of the originals, or aging versions, and there's new characters. And I always sort of thought, yeah, that's probably what they would need to do now, would leave the originals who they were, because they were so perfectly cast, weren't they? You know, you had Jacqueline Pierce and Paul Darrow and Michael Keating. Those three were real breakout stars. Michael Keating as Villa. And you also had, you know, Gareth Thomas and Josette Simon, and you know, I think Sally Nivette as Jenna, particularly. I think maybe those three, even Jan Chappell as Callie, you know, are so in the mind of the people who remember it. Yeah, that idea of doing something like Vindictus, where it's, let's pick up the story years down the track with a new group of people. Maybe call it Blake Seven because they're fighting in his name. He's kind of the legend, you know, the legend that they look to as inspiration to rebel against authority, not actually there physically. You know, he's someone they've read about in their history books.
Do you know what? I actually think that's definitely the way to go. Now I think about it. Work with the pre-existing material, set it ahead of time. Some of the characters will be descendants of the previous characters, and then you could also, with those actors who are still around, Michael Keating is still around, I believe. Or Josette Simon, of course, and Glynis Barber is still around. You could have some of those characters playing the same characters again, coming in as kind of guest guest of the week. You know, one mission they come across Su Lin, who is now, you know, commander of a pirate way station or something. So there's definitely mileage there. That would, I think, that would be a really good way to.
Yeah, you'd have to have new characters, but fighting in the same spirit, you know. And leave the old series where it is, and do it as a new show that's kind of a sequel to the original rather than a direct continuation. Yeah.
I think what would be really cool is because we know that the aliens that designed the Liberator existed, and there was actually a second version of those ships. And at some point, you could have them either come across or get hold of another ship of that alien race, and it could look similar to the Liberator, which would be very cool. Well, before we wrap up,
if they could reconstruct something like the Liberator, that would be great.
Let's talk about a TV series that a lot of people don't remember. I do remember it and there's various reasons why. I've got your book here, supporting my guests. The Tomorrow People. For anyone who doesn't remember, it was broadcast on ITV. It was broadcast at a weird time because one of the things that I remembered about it was if I didn't get back from school fast enough, all I would catch of it would be the end credits.
Pardon me, I can actually remember rushing home from school here in Australia for the same reason, because they were screening it shortly after school knockoff time at one point there, and I remember there was a really great cliffhanger, and I was desperate to see what happened next, and I had to race home from school to try and catch it.
It was like, I missed it. What the F was up with that? It was like, what are you doing? You're torturing us, and because it was on at school would get out at 3:45, and it was like the episode was, I think the episode started at either like 4 o'clock or 4:15. So basically, it was designed for people that were within immediate walking distance of their school or had their parents coming to pick them up. But if you were like of that age where your parents were like, you can make your own way home from school now, you can get the bus, which I was by then. I remember I used to have to wait for the bus, and then it was you go to the bus, you go home, and then you get off at the stop, and then that's another 5 minutes walk to the house. And I'd be like, tomorrow people. And it was always like I get in and it'd be dun. And I was like, oh, for God's sake, I missed it again. Because the episodes were quite short, weren't they? They were like with titles 25 minutes or something. Pretty short.
Do you remember the Roman Empire one?
The one that I mainly remember is the Slaves of Jebediah, which was the sort of Egypt, pyramids, Eye of Horus type stuff going on. There was a secret passage somewhere. That's the main one I remember. No, not so much, but do regale me with your story nonetheless.
Oh, I was going to say that I had a very similar experience to what you were saying there about trying to get home from school, because there was a cliffhanger ending of part 3 where they got back from ancient Rome, and instead of arriving back in London how they remembered it, they arrive in a sort of a parallel universe, alternate timeline where in the 1970s, the Roman Empire still exists and now rules the world, and there's alien slaves that look like Planet of the Apes, you know, and Earth's been renamed the planet Rome, and they've planted the Roman eagle on the moon and all this sort of thing, and it ended there. And the next day, I'm racing home from school, trying desperately to force myself to run a bit faster so I can get home to see this fourth and final part, because I was so desperate to find out what's going to happen. You know, how do they fix this parallel timeline with Romans in the 20th century ruling the earth, and how do they get the lab back, and how do they undo all this? You know. And I can just remember leaning on a brick fence with you know, like with a stitch, puffing and like, I've got to get home to see the Tomorrow People, you know, because the cruel buggers had put it on in this terrible time slot, you know, too close to the end of school time. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
well,
yeah.
so it was a TV show that was memorable for several reasons. It was one of the first British sci-fi shows, if I remember rightly, that had a black female actress as one of the leads, and Elizabeth Adair, I think I'm talking about. Seen on here. This was her main acting gig in her career, if I remember rightly. I think this was her main. This was the big.
I think she gave up acting and became, involved in something very serious like social work or something like that. So she doesn't really like to, talk too much about it. But I think the actors actually are all kind of, like anybody who's done something that people like, secretly a bit proud of it,
Yeah, I mean, because this was like ITV's alternative to Doctor Who. The BBC had Doctor Who, and somebody at ITV said to somebody else important to ITV, "Well, I think we ought to have a science fiction show for children. They've got Doctor Who. What are we going to have?" And you've got a great forward in the book, written by the son of the creator of the show, effectively the guy who wrote most of the scripts, I believe. He's talking about how he perused one of his father's scripts for the Tomorrow People. I think it was the pilot, wasn't it?
Well, the series was created by Roger Price, who really wanted to write a children's program, and he had all of these sort of forward-thinking ideas based off of the fact that when he was a kid, he was at school with a bunch of German kids, and he thought, our parents' generation were all fighting in World War II and wanting to kill one another, and we're here all sort of buddies, and he thought we must be like some new generation that's more enlightened than our parents, and he sort of had this idea of a new generation of kids that were more enlightened than the parents, maybe evolution had happened and they would have, powers and things like of telepathy and be like the kind of like the Star Child idea from 2001, I guess, a little bit of inspiration there maybe. But yeah, Brian Finch was a seasoned writer who wrote the actual scripts, I think, for the first season based off of Roger's ideas. And Paul, his son, is a very successful novelist and wrote for shows like The Bill, and actually is a former police officer. And I sort of said to Paul, I said, you wouldn't like to write me an intro, a foreword for the book by any chance, would you? And he said, well, I'll do it, So I was extremely grateful to Paul. And his foreword about, as a kid, how it captured his imagination and how he would sneak in and read his dad's scripts, and how his dad told him it's about kids just like you having all of these powers and adventures, and how he went to school and told the other kids and they were all playing it in the schoolyard. And, it's just such a wonderful thing to read. And, I'm just incredibly grateful to Paul for sharing that with me. That was just a real gift to have that.
Yeah, because I remember quite distinctly people playing Tomorrow People in school playground. This would have been probably 78, 79. I think the show started in, did it start in 73, 74?
72, I think, yeah.
And it ran for a few years, because I think it was still going in the late 70s. And,
yeah, they got eight seasons.
Yeah.
So the final season was just one 4-part story, unfortunately, because it was cut short by a strike. And then Roger Price left and went to Canada to work over there. He sort of got headhunted because of the success of the Tomorrow People on the Nickelodeon cable channel.
It's got one of the best, like, opening title sequences. Again, these, very clever, which I think is still pretty strong now. I'm going to show it before the end. I won't put it on just a second. And I mean, the show got remade in the early 90s with Naomi Harris as one of the
Yes.
who went on to big actress
They
now.
discovered Naomi Harris, yes.
Yeah, and
Right at the end.
they actually discovered her from the Anna Scher theatre school, which I went to just after her, funnily enough, to do acting. And that's where she got cast from that. But the lead actor in the show, remind me of his name. He's kind of the guy in charge. The dark hair.
Nicholas Young as John.
Nicholas Young, and he's still around, I believe.
Yes, he's an agent.
That's right. And there was a very funny interview with him where he was always saying he was getting people coming up to him saying, "Oh, I used to really fancy you when you were younger," and he'd go, "Yeah, but how about now?" And they'd be like, "Well, maybe not so much now."
That was then. They said, "Yeah, that's right." He says they'd say to him, "Ah, that was then, not now."
Yeah. But I mean, he's got quite a nice reverence for the show. Again, I guess the main job of his career prior to him becoming an agent. A lot of people remembered it. I guess my thinking is the reason for its success at the time was because the whole plot revolved around kids being special that were not quite like other kids. And if they were having trouble communicating or fitting with other kids, it meant that they were breaking out. And if breaking out was the term for you basically becoming a tomorrow person, X-Men child with special powers, and therefore you'd be recruited by the tomorrow people. What is that?
I think it was sort of the polar opposite of what's going on with things like Doctor Who at the moment and Disney's Acolyte show, which is instead of focusing on what makes us different from each other, it focused on everybody being sort of one of the group. Like if you were a bit odd or a bit weird, it's okay because you're one of us. You're one of the tomorrow people. You're kind of part of this new family.
Yeah.
Whereas if you watch The Acolyte or you watch the Ncuti Gatwa Doctor Who, they're all about, I'm different because I'm this and I'm that, and I'm not like everybody else. Whereas on the Tomorrow People, it didn't matter whether you were black or white or Asian. Once you broke out, you were one of the gang. You were one of the family. You were one of the Tomorrow People. So it really focused on what united us rather than focusing on what divides us.
I think it was quite groundbreaking in that context because, as I said, it gave Elizabeth Adair her main career role. She was a black female lead. She was the character that I most remembered actually from the show. Again, probably for confusing.
Very good actress. Very, very talented.
I really loved her. She had a kind of Fluella Benjamin motherly big sister type quality. That sort of drew you to her. And
they sort of wrote her as in a couple of her stories, she kind of tore strips off of the two guys, John and Stephen. She sort of gave them a mouthful when she didn't agree with them about something, and it really showed what a strong actress she was. And I think Nicholas Young sort of made a few quips about how he and Peter Vaughan Clark were in a state of shock when she first came in because it was like, oh my God, someone with actual talent is on the show. Now what do we do?
Did you, when you were writing this book, there was a number of child actors that took part. The lad on the right was kind of like the lead from this chap here was the lead from the first season. He sadly passed away not that long ago, I think.
The next one along above him, Peter Vaughan Clark.
That's because you did a dedication to him in the book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, same with what I said about Donald Sutherland. I in fact, even more because I've been writing this book. I actually found it really emotional when I heard he died. I actually was in the kitchen, and I sort of I had tears, and I said to my wife, "It's ridiculous. I've never met him, and yet I'm crying over him like a baby because I feel so connected to him. I've just written this whole book about him. I've been researching and rewatching the show and watching interviews with him and stuff over a 12-month period, and it's really rekindled how much the show meant to me when I was growing up. And I was just amazed how emotional it was when I heard that he passed away. It really upset me. It's funny how writing a book can really make you feel very connected to the people you're writing about.
I think that's quite normal, and I think it's. I mean, I remember the first time we talk about, people say it's ridiculous you crying over your favorite celebrity passing away. But my late father, and David Niven, at the time that David Niven was a big star, and I was seeing him in films like Paper Tiger and whatnot on TV, and the Seawolves and things. Him and my father had a very similar shaped head and similar shaped receding hairline, and they were both very well spoken. And my parents had met Niven somewhere, and they had a story about him. So he felt like a presence in our house. And I again, if he was in something, I would religiously watch it. And I remember coming home somewhere and the TV announcing David Niven had died. And I remember as a kid, I ran out of the house. I went and climbed up my nearest tree. This favorite tree I had in the park. I climbed up it and I sat in that tree and I cried for like 2 hours or something. It seems ridiculous, but if you have, that's the power of film and television culture. You can connect to not just the characters. Yeah, and you connect to the people as well for a variety of reasons. And I had seen by that stage many interviews with Niven, and he was incredibly charming, and I felt like I knew him. I felt like I'd met him. I hadn't met him, of course. I did meet Roger Moore just before he passed away, and again, a huge part of my life growing up. Wild Geese, Spy Who Loved Me, all the Bond films he did, so the Seawolves. He was a presence that was always around. So when you said you were upset about the passing of Donald Sutherland, that doesn't surprise me at all. He feels like a fixture that's always been in our lives. It's like losing a distant relative in some ways, who you always knew was around, but that you didn't get to meet. That's fair.
It's really true. That's very true. I was really upset, and the funny thing was, I'd sort of thought to myself over the years, I should always write a book about the Tomorrow People, and I'd always been thinking I should write a book about Sapphire and Steel. And, I finally got around to it. And within 12 months of my book about Sapphire and Steel, David McCallum died. And then within 12 months of me writing the book about the Tomorrow People, Peter Vaughan Clark, who played Stephen Jameson, died. So, I mean, I was in both instances, I was very emotional because, you've just written a book about these people, and you feel a very strong sense of connection, and so it's really heartbreaking. But
sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to
add about what you said about losing.
David Niven, Donald Sutherland.
Donald Sutherland, yeah. Even though Donald Sutherland wasn't someone who, I thought about often. Recently, I'd watched him in Man in a Suitcase, and I'd watched an interview with Richard Bradford from Man in a Suitcase talking about Donald Sutherland and what went on behind the scenes on that show. And again, it's just that feeling of you almost feel like you know this person in a way. So again, it's surprising how emotional it can be to lose a famous actor that you've always liked.
Yeah, I was going to ask on that basis, and I'm sure you've got other books planned, and if you haven't, I've got a couple of suggestions for you. But how open do you find that the cast are of these shows, because obviously if you're writing a guidebook, it's quite nice to get commentary from people if you can have a conversation with them and so on. Are people often open to speaking about it, or I know it tends to be one or the other, doesn't it? They're either happy to talk about it or no, they put it behind them. No, thank you. I tend to find these things.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because, like, you know, there are people like Gisette Simon, as you mentioned, and I remember Ed Bishop saying in interviews that there are a lot of people who saw UFO as water under the bridge, you know, and don't worry about it. Whereas there are people who definitely see it as a highlight of their career and they want to stay connected to it. Like just today, I was reading about Frankie Thomas, who played Tom Corbett, Space Cadet in the 1950s. He passed away in 2006, and he requested to be buried in his Tom Corbett Space Cadet uniform, you know, even though his success had been in the 1950s. So here we are, it's, you know, half a century later, he passes away in his 80s. And his co-star, who lived to be in his 90s, actually, his co-star actually passed away at 94 in the same year that my dad died, 2019. And he wrote a thing about his funeral, and he said the funny thing was they sent his Space Cadet uniform from Tom Corbett Space Cadet to the funeral people, and he said when they had a viewing of the body in the coffin, he says we noticed that they put the bloody uniform on back to front. So
oh no!
Yeah, and he said I roared with laughter because he says the first thing I thought was that Frankie Thomas would have absolutely died laughing if he'd known that, you know. He would have laughed his ass off. So they had to sort of get the funeral people hastily to turn the uniform round the right way, you know. And they all sort of checked again later that it was on right before they buried him, you know.
That's pretty funny.
It is, isn't it?
I mean, what have you got? All of Adrian's books are available on Amazon. If you're watching this and you're in the States, obviously look them up on Amazon.com rather than Amazon.co.uk, because if you order them on .co.uk, they'll take weeks to arrive.
Wonderful front covers by the very talented Kevin Langille, who's in Canada. And yeah, he's been such a kind-hearted person. That's one of his covers there. You can see the sapphire and steel. Kevin always just comes up with something so artistic and, you know, something which really pops like that. Look at that vortex thing there behind Joanna Lumley's head. It looks fantastic. So,
what books are you working on now? What have you got planned for the future?
Well, what I've got in the pipeline, incomplete, that I've made a start on, is Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Wow, Owen Allen's got a few. I mean, you've got Time Tunnel, you've got Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, you've got Land of the Giants there, Lost in Space. So there's a gold mine of stuff.
I've done one on Lost in Space, and it's actually been surprisingly well received, which I'm very grateful for. It's actually been one of my bigger successes, my Lost in Space book. So, yeah, Lost in Space forever, as they say. Love Jonathan Harris as Dr. Smith, such a funny, memorable character. So, yeah, I'm working on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. I've also done a fair bit of work on a guidebook to the Third Doctor, John Pertwee. A viewer's guide on the Pertwee era of Doctor Who. I've published a Fifth Doctor one about Peter Davison, which got very good reviews and very good star ratings, and not many sales. Yeah, but what can you do? Doctor Who's a saturated market, I think. So it could be just that, you know.
Yeah.
Probably Pertwee and Tom Baker would probably sell better than some of the other Doctors. And the other book I've done a fair bit of work on, which I haven't, again, is sort of sitting there incomplete, waiting for me to get back to it, is a book on Faulty Towers, just for something different.
Less sci-fi than your usual taste. perhaps.
Yeah. I thought I'd branch out and try Fawlty Towers because I do have a great love of John Cleese and that sort of madcap sort of British sitcom humour. Yeah. So I thought I'd try something outside of sci-fi just for a test of the waters, I guess, to see whether there's interest in that.
My recommendations for you are these two shows. I've never seen guidebooks or sort of making of books on either of these. I think they're both quite iconic in their own way. I've watched them both recently. One turned out to be massively disappointing because I'd never seen the ending, and I finally got to see the ending, and I was like, "Is that it?" So I was a bit annoyed. But the first of these is Children of the Stones, which I'm sure you remember. Very creepy ITV Granada children's show.
Yes.
Dropped, I think around 1977. Gareth Thomas again, about this weird cult in this town who are drawing power from stone obelisks and converting people one by one. And then the other one, which was the one that I finally got to see the ending of, was The Changes, which was a sort of BBC sci-fi post-apocalyptic thing from the 70s where everybody starts destroying machines. And I remember watching this and I never quite understood what was going on because I was extremely young. I was probably only about 3 or 4 years old or something. And it was the serious bit of drama that was on before the news. Just around the time I kind of got sent to bed. But I tracked it all down, and it was all Merlin's fault, which I found was rather crap as a story. But it's an interesting show, and they did do some pretty epic, some good stills here behind the scenes of filming it. When they were doing the shot of everybody coming out of their homes and wrecking cars and stuff. So it's an interesting one. I don't know if you remember this show.
Yeah, I watched it a few years ago. I watched it on the internet a few years back, yeah. I had seen it on TV. I remember it being shown here, and I remember, like you were saying, not really fully understanding it and just finding it a bit confusing and a bit weird. But I watched it all properly from woe to go. Yeah, I think even the actress who played the main part thought the ending was a bit naff,
without getting into spoilers, it's it's all because of a talking rock, and I was just like, and the myth, this Arthurian sort of myth, and I just thought, this is bollocks. Were people sitting around and smoking too much pot? What was going on here in the writing room? That was the best you could come up with because it's a pretty, the premise and the journey of them trying to find, what's going on and all of that, and it's actually quite exciting, quite gripping. It's as I said, it's an interesting premise.
The thing that really struck me when I watched it properly, the thing that really struck me about The Changes is that it begins the way that Quatermass and the Pit ends. It begins with an all-out breakdown of sanity and people going nuts and smashing everything and apocalyptic chaos. So it had this great opening episode, which gets you sort of stunned and confused and hooked straight away. So it sort of hooks you in right away. And then it sort of, goes along as a compelling sort of a kid's mystery adventure sort of story. But yeah, the quest in the end gets to this rock down, which they uncovered down deep underground. And the way I read it was that it was about progress. Progress had all gotten a bit too fast and a bit too carried away. And so all the machines had stopped and people were being controlled and made to destroy machines or stop everything because this intelligent force in this rock wanted to call a halt to human progress before we got too carried away and ruined the world or something, So it was a bit of an environmental kind of a theme there, I gathered. And then she sort of says something to it along the lines of, I don't think that's very good. You've got to let humans do their own thing, and but I'll tell them that they need to slow this progress thing down and not get too carried away. or something like that. And basically it relents, and there's suddenly there's all these signs of civilization. And I remember the actress herself she actually said in an interview she said, what happens at the end? And they said, oh, she sees the trucks and lights and hears sirens or something, like everything's going to be okay. And she's like, oh, it all just goes back to normal. Said, that's a bit naff, isn't it?
Yeah. I just
thought it was a bit of a naff ending.
I just thought, this is bollocks. It's really quite poor. And I was like, because it was that episode. It didn't get. I think it got reshown once. I think that possibly the time I caught it was probably the second time it was shown, and that was probably around 77 or 78 or something like that. So I remember catching a couple of episodes of it when I was really young, didn't understand what the fuck was happening, and then I saw more episodes when I was maybe 8 or 9, something like that, but
it sort of gets all the way. It sort of gets you all the way to the very last moment, and then you think, "Oh, it's just another kid show,"
Well, I mean, I got up to probably the second from last episode, and then for whatever reason, I didn't see the next 2 episodes. I can't remember why. Maybe I was rehearsing for a school play or something like that. Probably that kind of thing. So I didn't see it until 2 years ago, was because someone uploaded it to YouTube. I couldn't even remember the title of it, and I kept looking for it under changes rather than the changes, and it's just Andy Jones not impressed about it. He turned it off. You probably weren't wrong to do that. It's not worth your time. But Children of the Stones definitely, that's a show that's got a lot of merit, I think. Again, the ending a little bit wishy-washy, but it doesn't kill it. It's a good show. Keith is saying 90 minutes. I feel very sad to tell you we need a part 2 of this. Yeah, you may well have to come back. Is there anything else you want to plug before we wrap up?
No, well, I think I've been, I've lived a very interesting life. When I was very young, I had a lot of challenges in my life, but as I say, I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be a filmmaker and a writer and all that. And like a lot of these things, I was one of the 98% of actors who don't make a living out of it and don't get the big roles or anything. So I tried to make a lot of my own luck, and then went out of that into teaching, and pretty much was able to, support myself and my family for 20 years, and as a teacher. And then, when that started to fizzle, I've gone into writing these books, and so at the moment, I'm not exactly, I wouldn't say I'm exactly making a living out of writing books, but it's given me something of a lifeline to sort of cling on to. And so I'm just very grateful, and kind of amazed how much when you take on the idea of, I'm going to write about certain shows, the sort of responsibility that goes with it. Like if you have a question from someone about the show, or if someone wants to point out a mistake in one of the books or something, like a factual error, I find you have to be very diplomatic, almost like an ambassador for the show. And it's a responsible thing, because you're writing about something that means something to people. It means a lot to some people, and maybe even, as you say, maybe even the actors themselves sometimes become aware of your book, and you've got to be responsible. You can't be like, this is why I get shocked nowadays when I hear about actors who've been given a pretty major role, often on a huge salary, far more so than me. They should be like ambassadors for that brand, and sometimes they'll go on Twitter or in an interview, they'll say something really quite stupid or offensive to the fans, and I don't get that at all. You know, so yeah, I've found writing these books is a responsibility I've taken on without sort of realizing it first. But it has dawned on me that, you know, if I'm saying something about an actor's career in a book, you know, I want to be as accurate as I can. I don't want to mess it up, and I don't want to give any, you know, unfair or negative, you know, opinions. I've always tried to be positive about it. You know what I mean? Actors have a very good life, and they deserve to be supported and encouraged. You know.
Oh no, absolutely, and I'm sure Space 1999 season 2 pushed you to the limit where those extremes were.
Well, I did.
The actors did their best.
Laugh about Fred Freiberger at one point, which was that, do you know, Fred Freiberger was actually held prisoner in World War II by the Nazis, and he actually made a quip that the Nazis only tormented him for 12 months or something, but he copped 25 years plus from fans of Star Trek and Space 1999. So,
well, I mean, I'd like to say that was undeserved, but I can't.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Adrian, we're going to have to wrap it up there because I'm on with Game of Thrones in just over half an hour. We're doing House of Dragon season 2, episode 2, so I'm literally going to be back on the channel again in just over 30 minutes. But this has been great. We've gone over our usual 90 minutes. It's been fantastic having you on. It'd be great to get you back.
It's been a privilege and a pleasure, Lance.
Keep me posted about stuff, and also if I'm doing an episode, I know I'm aware of the time difference, although fortunately you're a bit like me, so it's not too much of a problem. You're up all weird hours, which are much to the delight of your wife, I'm sure. But been there, mate. If you're doing a discussion on any of these shows as a kind of episode of Chew the Fat, I'm quite tempted to do one on Blake 7 at some point. It would be great to have you back and have you on the panel, and
I'd be honored.
Have your opinions. I may well do a Space 1999 one. That's probably my favorite of the shows we've discussed today. I'm a big fan of UFO as well. But yeah, so thanks for everybody in chat. I didn't think I'd get many people watching at this time, but we've had quite a few people have popped in and out. And Andy Jones has kept us company for most of the time. Another one of my regulars, Daryl's just popped in. And of course, moderator Keith has been hovering about with his hammer, always handy. So we're going to be back in literally half an hour on Wednesday. If people haven't heard about it already, although, yes, we probably will be reviewing The Acolyte. I am going to be doing an industry interview, which is far more important. So if I am doing the Acolyte review, it will be later. I'm interviewing actor Jose Zuniga, who many people will remember was the mechanic in the film Alive, about the airplane that crashes in the Andes. Of course, there was a Society of the Snow, which was another version of that same story with an all-native cast. But he's been in absolutely loads of stuff, 146 credits on IMDb, including many iconic shows like The Expanse, The Shield, which of course is one of my favorite, more recently Snowfall, The Sound of Freedom. He actually reached out to me to come on the channel, which was really nice because it's usually the other way around. And he's been watching my stuff and was very impressed. So really looking forward to that interview on Wednesday. We'll probably do an Acolyte stream sometime after that if I can absolutely be asked. And then we are back.
The Acolyte must be the most boring show I've ever tried to sit through in science fiction.
It's just the worst. The dialogue on it is, I mean, it's beyond. The dialogue is beyond diabolical, and you'll see if you watch my. If you want to, that is, watch my streams about. We've done the first 3-4 episodes, however many there've been. I can't remember now. And I went into it very much of the mind of I'm no judgment on this show. I want it to be good. Actually, I want it to be good. You watch a Star Wars show, you want it to be good. And I did try and be constructive. And even episode 3, which for many people was the one that jumped the shark, was actually my favorite of the episodes thus far. And there were some things I liked about it. One of the lead actresses I thought was very good. But the dialogue is just, it all starts with the script, and the dialogue is just awful. It's just some of the worst writing I've ever seen in any show ever in the history of the entire universe. So unfortunately, and it's not got any better. So I just, yeah, it's no good. It's no good. So but we will be back talking about Band of Brothers episode 8 on Sunday with a special panel. And yeah, that's it. So guys, to sign us out, I'm going to show a quick clip, and I think we're going to end this with the awesome openings to a couple of the shows that we've been talking about. You can check out all the links for Adrian's work. Some of them are already down below, but if you just go onto Amazon.com and search for Adrian Sherlock, you'll find all of his books there. Right, until a bit later. Well, I'll see you shortly. Thanks very much.